Welcome to Africa God's Rising, a place where forgotten deities, ancient rituals, and hidden truths awaken once more. Here we journey deep into Africa's sacred past, uncovering the gods who ruled the skies, the rivers, the forests, and the underworld. Their voices were silenced, their stories buried, but now they rise again. Every beat of the drum, every flame of the shrine, every whisper of the ancestors is alive here. This is not just history. It is spirit, it is power, it is Africa. Reborn. You have entered Africa God's Rising, and the gods are waiting. A river moves, but it never truly passes. It is born from hidden springs, gathers strength as it winds through valleys, and empties itself into the sea, yet always returns with the rain. For the people of Africa, the river has never been just water. It is a living being, a mother, a judge, a god. It carries memory in its depths, whispers of ancestors in its currents, and healing in its touch. To step into its waters is not to bathe. It is to enter communion with the eternal. From the mighty Nile that carved civilizations into stone, to the Niger whose curve is the lifeline of West Africa, to the Congo whose roar echoes like thunder in the forest, rivers have been regarded as shrines of power. The ancients did not look at water as mere resource. They knew it as spirit. Where rivers flowed, life grew. Where rivers dried, famine followed. To honor the river was to honor life itself. But water was not only survival, it was medicine. People came to the banks with sickness, sorrow, or broken luck, believing the river could wash away what the body and spirit could no longer hold. Women prayed in sacred streams for fertility. Warriors cleansed themselves before battle. The guilty submitted themselves to the currents, trusting that the water would reveal truth, punishing liars and absolving the innocent. Priests and priestesses were guardians of these waters. They knew the songs, the libations, the sacrifices to awaken the river's favor. They were not seen as mere healers, but as interpreters of a living force, one that could bless with abundance or curse with flood. Even today, in hidden villages and sacred groves, rituals of river healing survive, whispered in secrecy after centuries of being outlawed. And yet, much of this wisdom has been forgotten or buried. Colonizers called the rivers pagan altars. Missionaries declared them demonic. Slowly, the rituals faded from the public eye, though they never truly died. For a river cannot die. Its spirit only waits. This is the story we now begin, the story of the river that heals, the forgotten rituals of Africa's waters, the goddesses and spirits who ruled them, the power they carried, the silence imposed upon them, and the ways they still rise today. The river is alive. It always has been, and if you listen closely, you will hear it still. Before the first word was spoken, before the first mountain rose, before the first fire was lit, there was water. In countless African traditions, water is remembered as the very womb of creation, the first element from which all others were born. To speak of water is to speak of origin, of covenant, of the eternal contract between humanity and the unseen. Water as the first mother among the Dogon of Mali, creation began in the waters of Nun, the primeval flood that covered all things. Out of this vast sea, the creator Amma shaped the first beings, who emerged dripping with the memory of the waters. Similarly, in Egyptian Kemet cosmology, the god Adam rose out of the boundless waters of Nun to breathe creation into being. In both stories, water is not backdrop. It is the eternal mother, the fertile ground upon which life itself was planted. The Igbo speak of Idemili, the sacred river goddess whose waters coil like the serpent around the world. She holds not only fertility, but law itself, for the covenant of water demands respect. The Yoruba tell of Oshun, the river goddess without whom creation could not be completed. When the male Orisha tried to shape the world without her, nothing flourished. Only when Oshun's waters were poured into the earth did life begin to grow. From this, the Yoruba teach that no creation, no healing, no abundance is possible without the feminine force of water, the sacred covenant. This is why water was never treated as mere resource. To drink from a river was to partake of its blessing. To pollute a river was to break covenant with the divine. Among the Akan, rivers were so sacred that people bathed and fetched water with prayers, offering libations before taking what they needed. The Shona of Zimbabwe called rivers the veins of the ancestors, for they carried the lifeblood of the land. The covenant was simple but unbreakable. Honor the water, and the water will honor you. Pour libation, cleanse your body, whisper your thanks, and the river will carry your prayers to the gods. But neglect it, and drought, sickness, or flood would follow. The river remembers who honors it and who betrays it. Water as judge and witness. Because of this, water became a place of oath. Contracts, promises, and even trials were sealed at riverbanks. To swear falsely before the water was to risk being carried away by it. In the Congo Basin, sacred pools were used to test truth. A guilty person would not survive immersion. In West Africa, warriors cleansed themselves in rivers before battle, believing that a man who lied to the water could not emerge alive. The river was not just life, it was law. It was the witness no human eye could deceive. Water as healer. The healing role of rivers was present from the very beginning. Springs and streams were seen as mouths of the earth, where the womb of creation poured out medicine for body and spirit. To bathe in the river was to wash away not only dirt, but curses, sickness, and misfortune. Priests and priestesses guided rituals of immersion, sometimes at dawn, when the river was thought to be most awake. Herbs were crushed into the water, chants were sung, and those afflicted were asked to surrender their burdens to the current. The belief was not symbolic, it was literal. The water carried away what was broken and returned life renewed. The covenant of water was not only about creation, but about restoration. The eternal memory of water. Even today, scientists speak of water as a substance that remembers, that carries vibrations and energies within its flow. But Africa's ancestors already knew this truth. For them, the river remembered every offering poured, every libation spilled, every oath sworn. This is why shrines were built at riverbanks, why no festival was complete without water rituals. The covenant was never forgotten, even if outsiders tried to erase it. The origins of Africa's sacred water rituals remind us of a truth older than time. Water is not a resource but a relative, not a substance but a spirit. To honor it is to live in balance with the universe. To forget it is to sever the very cord that binds humanity to creation. The river does not ask for temples, only for respect. And for those who remember, it still heals, still judges, still creates. The covenant flows on. If rivers are alive, then their spirits are queens, mothers, and gods. Across Africa, flowing waters were never empty. They were thrones. Within their depths dwelt beings of immense power, goddesses of fertility and sweetness, serpents of law and justice, guardians of oceans, and deities of rebirth. To speak their names was to call upon the oldest powers of creation, Oshun, the sweetness of the river. In Yoruba land, Oshun is the goddess of rivers, fertility, and love. Her waters are golden, shimmering like honey, for she embodies sweetness, prosperity, and beauty. Yet Oshun is no gentle figure to be underestimated. The Yoruba creation story tells how the male Orisha once tried to shape the world without her. They built, they planted, they labored, but nothing flourished. It was only when Oshun poured her waters upon the earth that life began to bloom. Without Oshun, creation itself is barren. Her river, the Osun River in Nigeria, is still a sacred pilgrimage site today. Women pray there for children, merchants ask for prosperity, lovers seek blessings, and the sick come for healing. Offerings of honey, copper, and pumpkins are cast into her waters. For Oshun is the mother who gives life, but she is also the goddess who demands respect. When angered, her floods are fierce. She heals, but she can also destroy. Yemoja, mother of oceans beyond rivers, lies the vast expanse of oceans. And here reigns Yemoja, or Yamaya, the great mother of waters. In Yoruba cosmology, she is the source of all rivers, for every stream eventually flows into her. She is the womb of the world, the protector of mothers, and the giver of life. Her element is not just physical water. It is motherhood itself, the sacred feminine that births and nourishes all beings. Her rituals often involve flowing water poured into the sea, offerings of fish, silver, or white cloth, and songs that praise her as Iya Agba, the Great Mother. In Brazil's Candomblé and Cuba's Santeria, she is one of the most beloved deities, her ocean rituals drawing thousands of devotees to the shore each year. To stand at the sea's edge and pray to Yemoja is to speak directly to the mother of all. Idemili, the serpent of law and water. Among the Igbo of southeastern Nigeria, the river goddess Idemili is one of the most feared and revered beings. Her name means the pillar of water. She is often associated with the sacred python, her living emblem. To the Igbo, the python is never killed or eaten, for it is Idemili's messenger, sliding silently between homes and villages as a reminder of the goddess's watchful presence. But Idemili is more than fertility and water. She is law. She represents Omenala, the Igbo cosmic order. To pollute her waters or to break an oath sworn by her river is to invite her wrath. Those accused of crimes in old times sometimes swore innocence at her shrine. The guilty would not survive the consequences. Idemili heals and blesses, but she also binds and judges. Hapi and the Nile deities. In ancient Egypt, the Nile was not only a river, it was the heartbeat of civilization. Its floods brought life to the desert, and so the Nile itself was deified. Hapi, the god of the inundation, was depicted as an androgynous figure with full breasts and a rounded belly, symbolizing fertility and abundance. Each year, the arrival of the floods was celebrated with festivals of praise to Hapi, for without him, crops would fail and kingdoms would fall. But the Nile also held the mysteries of death and rebirth. Osiris, the god of resurrection, was said to be drowned in the river, his body scattered, only to rise again as lord of the underworld. The Nile thus became both a cradle and a grave, a place of life's beginning and the souls return. Southern and Central Africa's river mothers. In southern Africa, the Zambezi River is tied to Nyami Nyami, the river god depicted as a great serpent or dragon. He is believed to dwell in the depths, protecting his people and bringing fertility to the land. When the Kariba Dam was built in the 20th century, local people said Nyami Nyami grew angry, shaking the earth with floods and storms to reclaim his waters. To this day, his spirit is invoked by fishermen and elders who live by the river. In Central Africa, the Luba and Lunda peoples honor sacred river mothers, spirits that appear as women dressed in white or half-human, half-fish beings. They grant blessings to those who approach with offerings, but drag away the arrogant who step into their waters without reverence. Water spirits. In everyday life across Africa, it is not only great rivers that are sacred. Small springs, ponds, and waterfalls often have their own spirits. Villagers pour libations before fetching water, drop coins or cowries into streams, and whisper prayers before drinking. In their eyes, every ripple carries a message. Every current has a watcher. Women often lead the rituals of water, for they share in the same creative force. Priestesses of Oshun, Idemili, and Yamoja guard their shrines with songs, dances, and taboos. To learn their secrets is to carry not only healing, but also authority over life itself. The lesson of the water spirits. The goddesses and spirits of Africa's rivers remind us that water is never empty. It is law and love, fertility and fury, birth and death. To step into sacred waters is to enter a throne room, to meet not mere reflections, but living beings who see, who listen, who judge, and who heal. In their embrace, Africa's rivers were never forgotten. Even if missionaries and colonizers tried to erase their memory, Oshun still dances in the Osun Grove. Idemili still coils in her streams. Yamoja still roars with the ocean, and Hapi's flood still carries silt down the Nile. The rivers live because the spirits live, and the spirits live because water itself cannot die. If the river is a goddess, then to enter her current is to step into her embrace. Healing rituals at the waters were not simply customs, they were covenants of renewal. Across Africa, rivers were living shrines where body, spirit, and community were cleansed together. The people did not come to water merely to drink. They came to be healed, to be judged, to be made whole. Bathing and immersion. One of the most universal rituals was bathing in sacred rivers. The act was more than washing dirt from the skin. It was washing curses, misfortune, and illness from the soul. In Yoruba land, devotees of Oshun entered her river with white cloth tied around their waists, whispering prayers as the cool water flowed over their bodies. Women seeking fertility would immerse themselves at dawn, believing the goddess herself touched their wombs with new life. Among the Igbo, immersion in Idemili's waters was a sacred act of purification. Warriors cleansed themselves before war. The accused bathed before swearing an oath. The sick were led into the current by priests, who recited incantations as they sprinkled herbs into the stream. If healing came, it was said that the river had accepted their offering. Libations and sacrifices. No ritual at the river was complete without libation. Before drinking, before bathing, before fetching water, libations of palm wine or fresh water were poured upon the ground. This was a gesture of respect, acknowledging the spirits who guarded the current. In more elaborate ceremonies, offerings were cast directly into the river. honey and copper for Oshun, kola nuts for Idemili, white cloths for Yamoja. In the Nile Valley, ancient Egyptians once offered bread, beer, and perfumes to Hapi, thanking him for the life-giving flood. The river was never approached empty-handed, for water gives life, and it must be honored with life in return. Herbal healing with water priests and priestesses also used water as a vessel for medicine. Herbs were crushed into the river, mixing their essence with the current, which was then used to bathe the sick. Sometimes water was fetched before dawn, when it was believed to be alive with the breath of the spirits. This water, blessed with incantations, was used to cure fevers, infertility, or spiritual afflictions. Among the Shona of Zimbabwe, water spirits were believed to dwell in pools and waterfalls. Healers called upon them during rituals of affliction, asking the spirits to reveal the causes of illness. If a patient convulsed or entered trance at the water's edge, it was taken as a sign that the spirit of the sickness had been exposed and could now be healed. Community cleansings and festivals healing was never just individual, it was communal. Entire villages sometimes gathered for water cleansing festivals. At Oshun's sacred grove in Nigeria, the Osun Osogbo festival continues to this day. Thousands gather, carrying offerings to the river, dancing, singing, and immersing themselves in her waters. Here, the river heals not just individuals, but entire communities, binding them together in rhythm and spirit. In Malawi, rituals at Lake Malawi once honored the water god Chaituta, who granted health and fertility. Families gathered to wash, feast, and pray, asking the lake to protect their children from sickness and their crops from drought. These communal rites reminded people that healing flows not only into the body, but into the land, the village, and the generations to come. The priestesses of the river. At the center of these rituals stood the water priestesses. Guardians of sacred shrines, they knew the songs, chants, and taboos of the rivers. Some were born into their calling, chosen by spirits through dreams or trances. Others inherited the role through lineage. They were feared and revered, for their authority came not from kings or chiefs, but from the river itself. A water priestess could bless a barren woman, cleanse a warrior of blood guilt, or heal a child stricken with mysterious fever. But she could also curse those who polluted the river or mocked the rituals. Her role was both healer and guardian, for to offend her was to offend the river gods themselves. The living water. At the heart of all these rituals was the belief that water is alive. It carries memory, listens to prayers, and responds with blessing or punishment. To step into a river was to surrender oneself to forces greater than flesh. Healing did not come from water alone, but from the spirits who dwelt within it, the ancestors who watched through it, and the gods who flowed as its currents. Even today, where rituals are still practiced, the testimony is the same. The river heals. Not because it is chemical, but because it is spiritual. Its healing flows deeper than the body. It touches the soul. If the river can heal, it can also judge. For water does not only cleanse the body, it reflects the soul. Across Africa, rivers were not just lifelines for crops and trade. They were courts, oracles, and sacred witnesses. To stand before a river was to stand before an eye that could not be deceived. The water, in its depth and silence, became a judge that exposed what words tried to conceal. The river as witness of oaths. In many African societies, No covenant was sealed without water. To swear by a river was to call upon the goddess who dwelled within it. If the oath was true, the water blessed the speaker. If it was false, the water avenged itself with sickness, infertility, or sudden death. Among the Igbo, oaths taken at Idemili's shrine were binding beyond human authority. A liar might escape the judgment of chiefs, but not of the goddess. Her river remembered every word spoken, and her python, her living messenger, was said to bring ruin upon those who dared to deceive. The Akan of Ghana followed a similar belief. When disputes arose, conflicting parties went to the river to swear innocence. The guilty, they said, would not live long afterward. The river, as witness, could never be bribed. Trials by water. Some regions practice trial by immersion, a ritual of terrifying faith. In the Congo Basin, a suspect accused of witchcraft or betrayal might be plunged into sacred pools. If they emerged unharmed, the river had absolved them. If they drowned, it was taken as proof of guilt. Harsh though it seems, it reflected the belief that the river was not merely water, but the living breath of ancestors. Only truth could float upon its currents. Lies were dragged down into its depths. In West Africa, some rituals used calabashes or charms placed upon the surface of the river. If the object floated toward the accused, they were guilty. If it drifted away, they were innocent. In both cases, the decision was trusted entirely to the spirit of the water. The river as oracle beyond judgment. Rivers were also consulted as oracles. Priestesses of Oshun or Yemoja would sit by the water, casting cowries or kola nuts while listening to the rhythm of the current. The river's surface became a mirror, where visions appeared and answers were revealed. Fishermen asked which day to cast their nets. Farmers asked when the rains would come. Women asked whether children were destined for their wombs. In Malawi and along the shores of Lake Victoria, sacred rivers and lakes were consulted for weather and harvest. A sudden ripple, a clouded surface, or the unexpected appearance of an animal were taken as signs. The river did not speak in words. It spoke in movement, reflection, and sound. Water as mirror of conscience. Underlying all these practices was a simple truth. No one can look into water without seeing themselves. In that reflection lies conscience. To confess sins at the riverbank, to wash in its currents, to pour libation into its flow. These were not external acts only, but inner reckonings. The guilty saw their shame mirrored. The humble found peace in surrender. The river was not just a judge of deeds, it was a judge of the heart, fear and reverence. Because of this, water was approached with reverence and fear. Children were warned never to play carelessly at sacred rivers. Hunters asked permission before crossing. Even today, elders in parts of Nigeria, Ghana, and Zimbabwe caution that rivers hear everything and never forget. To pollute or desecrate a river is not simply to offend nature. It is to defy the gods themselves. The legacy of the river judge. Though missionaries tried to erase these rituals, replacing them with church trials or colonial courts, the river's authority was never fully broken. Even now, in remote villages, some disputes are still taken to rivers. And in Christianity and Islam, echoes remain. Baptism in water, ablution before prayer, purification through immersion. The forms changed, but the essence survived. Water is the place where truth is tested, where spirits witness, where conscience is cleansed. The African river as oracle and judge reminds us that truth is not written only in words or scrolls, but in the living elements of creation. The water sees, the water remembers, the water reveals. And in its depths lies a justice older than kings. When the missionaries and colonizers arrived, they quickly realized that Africa's rivers were not just waters, they were temples. Every stream was an altar, every priestess a guardian, every libation a covenant. And so, to break the people's spirit, they attacked the waters, demonizing the river's missionaries. Both Christian and Islamic declared river shrines to be idols and works of the devil. The sight of women bathing in sacred waters, carrying offerings of honey or palm oil, horrified them. They replaced the language of reverence with the language of fear. What was once healing became called witchcraft. What was once justice became called superstition. In the eyes of colonizers, the river goddesses were not mothers but demons. Sacred groves along rivers, like Oshun's Grove in Nigeria or Idemili's shrines in Igboland, were cut down, fenced, or abandoned under colonial pressure. Priests and priestesses were shamed, mocked, or even punished publicly for leading rituals. Slowly, practices once celebrated openly had to retreat into secrecy, silencing the priestesses. Perhaps the greatest attack was against the women, female priestesses of water. Once central figures in their communities, were stripped of authority. In a colonial world ruled by men, the idea that women carried the voice of the river was intolerable. Many priestesses were branded as witches, their shrines burned, their rituals outlawed. By silencing them, colonizers severed communities from their most powerful spiritual mediators. The priestess who once blessed fertility was replaced by the midwife of the mission hospital. The healer who once spoke at the river was replaced by the colonial court. Yet beneath the silence, the women still whispered. The waters still called them. Christian and Islamic substitutions. Yet the colonizers could not entirely erase water rituals. Instead, they replaced them. In Christianity, baptism was emphasized as the only true water ritual, stripping away the names of Oshun, Idemili, Yemoja, or Hapi, but keeping the cleansing power of immersion. In Islam, ablutions before prayer replaced ancestral rites, focusing on purity but severing it from the older gods. In both faiths, water remained central, but the spirits were erased. The same rivers once known as mothers and deities were now declared lifeless, mere symbols of holiness controlled by foreign religions. The quiet survival. But water cannot be owned, and it cannot be silenced. Even during the height of suppression, many Africans carried their rituals underground. Offerings were cast at rivers at night, hidden from missionaries' eyes. Women whispered prayers while fetching water, pouring the first few drops back into the stream as libation. In places like Osogbo in Nigeria, devotees of Oshun continued to honor her river, even as colonial laws tried to ban the practice. And so the colonizers mistook silence for defeat. What they did not understand was that the waters were patient. Rivers had flowed for thousands of years before the colonizers arrived, and they would flow for thousands after they left. The rituals did not die. They hid, waiting for the time to rise again. Though the colonial powers fought to silence Africa's rivers, they could not erase their spirit. Water is eternal, and so too are the rituals tied to it. In the modern era, what was once hidden has begun to rise again. Across Africa and the diaspora, rivers are once more honored as living shrines, their goddesses remembered, their festivals revived, and their healing powers sought by both the faithful and the curious. The water has returned, and with it, the memory of the ancestors. Pilgrimages to the sacred rivers. Perhaps nowhere is this clearer than at the Osun Osogbo Sacred Grove in Nigeria. Once nearly abandoned under colonial pressure, it has now become one of the most celebrated centers of African spirituality. Each year, thousands of pilgrims gather at the Osun River to honor Oshun, bringing offerings of honey, cloth, and flowers. Women pray for fertility, merchants ask for wealth, and entire families bathe in the sacred current for healing. The festival, recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, has transformed from a fading tradition into a living testament of continuity. It is proof that even centuries of suppression cannot silence a goddess. Among the Igbo, the reverence of Idemili's waters continues in pockets of southeastern Nigeria. Shrines by her rivers still attract devotees who pour libations and leave sacrifices, sometimes in secrecy, sometimes in open defiance of modern religious scorn. The sacred python, her emblem, is still treated with awe. To kill one remains taboo in many communities, for to do so is to invite the goddess's wrath. The diaspora revival. But the rivers did not only flow in Africa. They crossed the ocean with enslaved Africans, where their rituals survived in disguise. In Cuba, Oshun is honored in Santeria. In Brazil, she shines in candomblé, her golden colors and river offerings preserved through centuries. Yemoja, goddess of oceans, is celebrated every year on Brazilian shores, where thousands dressed in white cast offerings of flowers and perfumes into the waves. What was once hidden has now become a public festival, drawing crowds not only of devotees, but also of onlookers who feel the pull of the water's mystery. In Haiti, the LWA spirits of Vodou still respond to the beat of the tambour drums and the pouring of water at rivers. In the American South, baptism ceremonies echo the older immersion rituals, where water is not just symbol but power. Every splash into rivers and lakes carries the memory of Africa's covenant with water. Modern healing practices beyond ritual. African communities today are rediscovering the rivers as medicine. Herbalists fetch dawn water for cures, claiming it carries stronger spiritual potency. In urban centers, young people return to their ancestral villages to seek blessings at rivers, believing that healing cannot come from hospitals alone, but must be balanced with the renewal of spirit. Even environmental activists have begun to invoke the spiritual role of rivers. In Ghana and Nigeria, some movements for water protection now draw upon traditional reverence, declaring that pollution is not only ecological harm but sacrilege against living spirits. This merging of spirituality and modern activism shows that the old rituals still speak to present struggles. The return of memory. What we see today is not simply a revival of festivals. It is the return of memory. The waters were never forgotten. They were only suppressed. Now, as Africans and their diaspora reclaim their heritage, the rivers are once more treated as shrines. They are not only places of history, but places of living presence, where gods and ancestors still answer. The river has returned. It flows again in chants, festivals, secret prayers, and public celebrations. It heals bodies, blesses wombs, and reconciles communities. It carries with it the voices of thousands of years, reminding us that water is more than survival. It is spirit. The river flows, and in its current lies the memory of all that has been. Empires rose on its banks, gods were worshipped in its depths, and healing was sought in its embrace. Though colonizers tried to silence it, though missionaries sought to rename it, though modernity often forgets it, the river has never ceased to remember. It carries within its waters the whispers of every libation poured, every prayer spoken, every oath sworn, and every soul cleansed. To the ancestors, the river was not only nature, it was a covenant. It was a mirror of truth, a womb of creation, a judge of conscience, and a healer of both body and spirit. To stand by its edge was to stand before eternity, for the waters we see today are the same waters that touch the feet of those who walked thousands of years before us. In today's world, the rivers still wait. At Osogbo, Oshun's waters are still sweet. At the Nile, Hapi's floods still feed the land. At Idemili, the python still glides in silent reverence. At the ocean, Yemoja still breathes as the eternal mother. And in hidden springs, small streams, and village ponds across Africa, ordinary people still pour libations, still whisper prayers, still call upon the healing currents. The river has always known. It knew when people were torn from its shores into slavery. It knew when its shrines were desecrated. It knew when its priestesses were silenced. Yet it also knows that memory cannot be erased. For water is eternal. It changes shape, but it never dies. And so, the water still remembers. It remembers the songs, the sacrifices, the hands that blessed it, and the tears that fell into it. It remembers because it is alive, and because it remembers, it still heals. The river is not waiting for us to teach it anything. It is waiting for us to listen, to return to its banks, to hear its voice, to feel its current. For those who approach with reverence will discover the same truth the ancestors knew, that the river heals, not because it is water, but because it is spirit. And spirit does not die. It flows,